Let's take a brief look at what you're doing this week in Module 3. Module 3 talks about founders. In founders, we're looking at an initial population that founds our captive population or our new wild population. We're looking at what that does to the population size, the effective population size, which is this NE value here, also what it does to the genetic diversity. How do we look at a founding population and interpret what that means to the genetic structure and genetic diversity of that population now, and what does that mean as we move forward with this population? In the learning materials, you have a brief video that talks about how to interpret kinship. Some of the math that you're going to be asked to do in this week's assignment is talked about here in this video. Then you also have some reading, some out of the Ballou chapters, some of the sections out of the Frankum chapter. You also have a species survival plan that you can look at on the dusky gopher frog. So this will show you what an actual species survival plan looks like. And then you also have a case study of bearded vulture and the genetic drift and bottleneck effect that occurred. These will give you the background and concepts that you need for this week's assignments. Your first assignment is a discussion. In your initial post, talk a little bit about effective population size, the dangers of having a low effective population size that creates bottlenecks. You're writing a brief report to the president of your fictional zoo or aquarium. Make sure that you let them know what the specific dangers are for your particular fictional zoo in terms of these low population sizes and the bottlenecks that are created. You can assume that they know a bit about what happens to the genetics of small populations, but you are going to focus a little bit more on specifically the dangers of a low effective population size and the bottlenecks that are created. You want to include the differences between genetic drift, founder effects, NE over N ratio, and bottlenecks. Provide at least one citation. Remember, peer-reviewed means this is something that has appeared in a scientific journal, whether it's a review paper or a research paper. Typically, the species survival plans, in most cases, are not considered peer-reviewed because they are reports that are generated for some institution, but they often are not peer-reviewed. If it's not in an academic journal, you don't really want to use that as a peer-reviewed source. It doesn't mean that they're not great to use. They are, but they're not peer-reviewed typically. For your response posts, reply to at least two of your peers. Pretend that you are the president of this zoo. You're going to take a look at this plan that they have proposed to you. You're going to identify an issue with their plan, what you think would cause that issue, or if you don't find issues, why do you think the author did a good job identifying the issues and planning accordingly. So make sure you take a look at all of these questions, and also remember for discussions, if you want to see the rubric, you come up here and click these three little dots, go to show rubric so that you can see where those points are coming from. So that's your discussion for week 3. Your first assignment for week 3 looks at kinship coefficients. So what you're doing is taking a document template and you're going to do some kinship calculations in this template. Make sure you take a look at that short video at the beginning of the learning materials because this is going to tell you how to do that. The Frankum chapter also gives you an idea of how to do this. And there's some instruction here as well. They have given us the individual kinship coefficients. So this is looking at the degree of kinship between individuals. This would be between male 46 and female 31. So these are looking at that degree of relatedness between them. And what it's going to ask you to do is to calculate the MK for each of those individuals. And the example is showing that here. Download this Word document. When you download the Word document, you will have this table. You're going to fill in this column of the table, calculating the MK for each individual in the population, and then you're going to take the mean of that here. So in essence, what you're doing is taking a mean across each of these rows for this value, and then you're taking the mean of this column for this value here. In addition to filling out the table, it's asking you to describe what it means. What does that table mean, and how do you use that table? Looking at each of those mean kinship values for your individuals in the population, what would you do with that information? And then what would you do with the information about the overall population mean kinship? Finally, it's asking you to make recommendations. So what I would do is pull up this section of Ballou and see what's in section 10.8 and follow those in order to decide what recommendations you would make. Down below the assignment, we have the grading rubric. And then your second assignment for week 3 is looking at interpreting genetic summary tables. They're going to give you 2 genetic summary tables from 2 different endangered species, the African painted dog and the African penguin. And they're going to ask you some questions about interpreting the data within this. Now, one of the things I want to show you, if you want to include this so you don't have to keep flipping back and forth, you can use the snipping tool. The snipping tool is down here. If you don't have it, go into your start screen and then search for it. So if you just start typing in snip, it should come up with the snipping tool app. To create a snip, I hit new, and then I just highlight what I want. So if I want this to come over to my Word document, I can highlight that. It'll show up here. If I right click on this, I can do copy, and then I can go over to a Word document and paste that in. And then I can answer the questions without having to go back and forth. So you can use this on anything. You can snip anything that you have on your screen and put it into another document. Now, looking at the data in the tables, it's asking you to answer some questions. You can find some of that information in the reading. You can also find some of that information in those species survival plans because they will interpret some of those values that you find in the table. If you're not finding what you need in the readings, go and look at a few of those species survival plans because they might give you a little bit more direct interpretation of the data from the tables. As we scroll down, we can see the grading rubric below. Those are your assignments for this week. If you have any questions, please let me know. Have a great week.